Hello viewers, in this lesson we shall try to understand civil courts in India, its general principles, hierarchy and jurisdiction. We know that in every country there are two kinds of courts, the higher courts and the lower courts. As far as India is concerned, the higher judiciary consists of the Supreme Court and High Courts, which have already been discussed in the previous lessons. When we come to the lower courts or the subordinate courts, there are two classes of such courts traditionally. One is the civil courts and the other one is the criminal courts. Of course, there could be a third category of lower courts like special courts. When it comes to the civil courts in India, we need to understand that there is a basic distinction between the higher courts like the Supreme Court and High Courts and the lower courts like the civil and criminal courts. The lower courts are the courts of fact, where the facts are proved or disproved with the help of evidence in a trial conducted by the courts. And it is said that procedure is the handmaid of justice. The same principle applies to the civil procedure also. When we look at the civil courts, in the good old days, that is during the British regime, there was altogether a different system in the form of adalats established under the leadership of Warren Hastings sometime in 1774, and there used to be Mofussil Diwani Adalat. In certain cities there used to be Recorder's Court. There used to be other courts also. With regard to the Adalat system, there used to be Sadar Diwani Adalat at the higher level, and from there the appeals could be made even before the Supreme Court established at Calcutta, and from that court the appeals could go even to the Judicial Committee of Privy Council in England. Over a period of time, the Adalat system got replaced by the modern system of civil and criminal courts. When we look at the civil courts in India, we find that they are established under the provisions of Civil Procedure Code 1908. In fact, the CPC is one of the earliest codes which is a result of codification of procedural laws in India. This process was initiated by William Bentinck sometime in 1830s and culminated in codification of number of substantive as well as procedural laws. CPC is the best example of codifying the procedural law. When we come to the CPC of 1908, we find that the purpose of the code is to provide or to lay down a procedure for the purpose of filing the suits, trying them and ultimately coming out with a judgment which determines the rights and obligations of the parties. And CPC is a very novel law because it is based on the principles of natural justice, more particularly the rule of fair hearing. We know that no person can be condemned unheard, and CPC tries to ensure that this saying is given effect to, right from the institution of suit till it is finally disposed of. At every stage we come across the procedure of fair hearing demanded by the court to be implemented. Apart from that, the CPC also takes into consideration the necessity of preventing multiplicity of proceedings, either in the interest of the state or the government, and also to respect the saying that the judgment of the court must be treated as the proper judgment and that it should be respected. That is the precise reason why there are two other principles: the principle of res sub judice and the principle of res judicata, recognized under the CPC. Any matter which is pending before one civil court involving the same issue cannot become the subject matter of any other civil suit before any other court. This is the essence of the principle of res sub judice under section 10 of CPC. Similarly, if any dispute has been already resolved by the competent court involving the same parties, involving the same issues, and if the matter is already disposed of fully and finally, adjudicating the rights and obligations of the parties, then there cannot be any fresh litigation. This is the essence of the principle of res judicata, recognized under section 11 of the CPC. It also recognizes the principle of constructive res judicata, which is also known as the principle of ought and might. In other words, if any issue which is relevant to the determination of a dispute is not raised for any reason whatsoever, and which could have been raised, then subsequently it will not be allowed to be raised. It is known as doctrine of might and ought. This is also recognized by CPC. There are any number of such basic principles which are incorporated in the Code of Civil Procedure 1908 to ensure that both the litigants or both the parties are given a fair hearing and a fair chance to prove their case through the court. This is as far as the general principles are concerned. When we come to the hierarchy of courts in India, especially the civil courts, we find that both the higher courts, namely the Supreme Court and High Courts, are also civil courts in a way. However, they may not have original jurisdiction in all the civil matters, and the CPC says that every civil suit must be instituted in the lowest court having the jurisdiction to try it. That way, majority of the disputes originate in the lower courts and they reach the higher courts only by way of appeal, revision or review. Coming to the hierarchy of civil courts in India, it may be seen that there is a three-tier system followed in India right now. At the highest level, at the district court level, there is a district judge or additional district judges court. This is the highest court in the subordinate civil judiciary. Below the district court or additional district court, there is the court of senior civil judge, and below the senior civil judge, there is another court called junior civil judge. Below the junior civil judge, generally there are no other courts except the small causes courts with petty pecuniary jurisdictions in certain metropolitan cities. Otherwise, it is a three-tier system which is followed from district level downwards. And when we look at the jurisdiction of the civil courts, we find that there are three kinds of jurisdiction. One is territorial jurisdiction, that is with regard to the territory in respect of which a court can decide the matter. Second is the pecuniary jurisdiction, because there are certain limits as far as this jurisdiction is concerned. District court may not have any limit as far as pecuniary jurisdiction is concerned. It is unlimited. A district court can hear a matter even if the matter involves 1000 crores or more. Below that, senior civil judges normally they hear the matter if the value of the suit is somewhere around 10 lakhs. The junior civil judge below them will have a lesser jurisdiction. Normally, the jurisdiction keeps on changing depending on the policy of the government. This is as far as pecuniary jurisdiction is concerned. The third kind of jurisdiction exercised by the civil courts is called subject matter jurisdiction, which denotes that certain matters can be decided by only certain courts. Even in the civil litigation also, we come across courts like rent controllers courts or cases dealing with the compensation in case of motor vehicle accidents, so on and so forth. So, they hear only those cases pertaining to certain fields. This is as far as the jurisdiction is concerned. Small causes courts may have a very limited pecuniary jurisdiction, like up to 25,000 rupees suit valuation. In the Indian legal system, civil suits play an important role. Suit is not defined under the CPC. However, it is understood as acceptance of a plaint submitted to the civil court by the plaintiff, that is the person who files the civil case, and it is the primary form of civil litigation in India. And the civil suits have four essential characteristics. One, parties. There must be at least two parties to the suit. The person who files the suit is called plaintiff, and the person against whom the suit is filed is called defendant. There can be multiple plaintiffs and multiple defendants also. However, we need at least one plaintiff and one defendant. In certain exceptional cases, there can be suits between the defendants themselves when there is a common interest between them. They are also recognized as inter pleader suits. The second essential condition is cause of action. Cause of action is the fulcrum of civil litigation. Cause of action is nothing but a bundle of developments, a bundle of facts which give rise to cause of action. In other words, which enable a party to approach the court. For instance, if a bank advances loan to a debtor and the debtor commits default in repayment of the installments, commission of default could be cause of action. This is one. So, without cause of action, the court cannot be approached, and in fact, any suit filed without cause of action is liable to be dismissed. The third essential condition of the civil suit is that it should be filed in a court having competent jurisdiction. We have already seen that jurisdiction here denotes the territorial jurisdiction, the subject matter jurisdiction, and the pecuniary jurisdiction. Only those competent courts can decide the matter. The fourth essential condition of a civil suit is the relief, the prayer, the relief which is sought by the plaintiff. The relief could be in the form of either compensation or injunction or recovery of possession of movable or immovable property or declaration or sometimes even attachment of property, sale of property, so on and so forth. Here the relief could be either final relief or interim relief. If it is the final relief, it is normally granted only at the time of judgment. If it is any temporary relief, we also call it interim relief. It may be in the form of a temporary injunction or appointment of commissioner or grant of stay, that is nothing but temporary injunction, or security for certain transactions likewise. Any number of interim reliefs can be sought by filing certain proceedings called interlocutory applications in a civil suit. These four are the essential conditions. The fifth one could be limitation also. Any suit has to be filed within a period of limitation, which is stipulated by the Limitation Act 1963. The statute imposes certain fixed periods of limitation like 3 years, 60 days, 90 days, depending on the transaction mentioned in the articles appended to the Limitation Act. If any suit is filed beyond the limitation period, it is liable to be dismissed unless the delay is condoned by the court. This is as far as the essentials of the suit are concerned. Civil suits have different stages. One can understand better the stages of civil suits in different steps. The very first step is presentation of the plaint, also called filing of the suit. The plaintiff will file the suit by presenting the plaint before the competent court, by paying the court fee required under the rules, and once the plaint is accepted, it will be numbered as the suit. There is a possibility that the plaint may be returned for want of certain complaints of objections, or it may be rejected altogether. If it is accepted, it becomes suit. That is the first step. Once the suit is numbered by way of accepting the plaint, the second step comes into picture. The court will issue summonses to the defendant or defendants, calling upon them to appear before the civil court on a given date to answer the questions raised by the plaintiff in the suit, either through himself directly or through an advocate engaged by him. This is for the purpose of giving notice to the defendant. This is the second step. In India, after 2002, even information technology can be used for the purpose of issuing summonses, which could be different kinds of summonses. Sometimes there can be even substituted service where the intended recipient is not available. It could be by fax or email, so on and so forth. The third step is written statement. Written statement is nothing but a statement of defense. If the plaint is a statement of claim made by the plaintiff, written statement is the statement of defense filed by the defendant. Normally, after receiving summons and after appearing before the competent court on the given day, the defendant has to file his statement of defense unless he concedes the demand or claim of the plaintiff. It is subject to provisions of section 89 of Civil Procedure Code. Section 89, which came into force from 2002, enables the presiding officer of the court to refer the matter for out of court settlement if both the parties agree, by way of referring it to an arbitrator or for conciliation or for mediation or by way of judicial settlement through Lok Adalat. And if both the parties agree, this relief can be availed by them, or else the Civil Procedure Code would apply for the subsequent proceedings. Assuming that both the parties have not agreed to refer the matter for out of court settlement, then the third stage comes, wherein written statement has to be filed, generally within 30 days from the date of receipt of summons, which can be extended by 60 more days. If there is a failure on the part of the defendant, then the matter can be decided based on the facts or the documents available before the court. When the written statement is filed, the fourth step comes into picture. It is called framing of issues, the contentious issues between the plaintiff and defendant. If plaintiff claims something and the defendant denies it, it is an issue. Therefore, from the plaintiff's plaint and the written statement of the defendant, the court will cull out and identify the issues to be decided by the court. There could be multiple issues, right from maintainability of the suit to the jurisdiction of the court to the issues relating to cause of action, specific claims and specific denials. Then the fifth very important step commences, that is called trial. Trial is nothing but the process of trying the suit by the civil court. During the trial, many things take place. Presentation of documents, marking them as exhibits. It may also involve examination of parties. The examination could be either examination in chief, cross-examination, or the re-examination as laid down under the Indian Evidence Act 1872. So, trial will be concluded by the arguments advanced on behalf of the parties, which take into consideration the facts, the evidence and the law put together. This is the fifth stage. The sixth stage is judgment. After hearing the arguments on both the sides, after perusing the evidence produced by both the sides, the learned judge will proceed to write a judgment which is nothing but statement of reasons for giving his decision. Normally, the judgment has to be pronounced within 30 days from the date of last hearing, conclusion of the trial. It consists of the facts of the case, the issues identified, then the evidence produced in relation to each issue by both the parties, the arguments advanced, and ultimately the judgment is pronounced in respect of each issue. And the judgment becomes the basis for determining the rights and obligations of respective parties, namely the plaintiff and defendants, conclusively. Then comes the seventh step, we call it execution of decree. Normally, when the judgment is given, a decree has to be drawn by the learned judge who decides the matter. Decree is the final and conclusive determination of the rights and duties of the parties. In a way, it is an operative portion of the judgment, like what the successful party is entitled to and what the unsuccessful party is under an obligation to do. When the decree is drawn by the court, there will be two parties to it. One is the decree holder, the successful party, and the other one is judgment debtor, JD. In fact, this decree becomes the basis either for preferring an appeal by the aggrieved party to the higher court or for execution of the decree by the decree holder through the competent court. Execution of the decree is nothing but honoring the decree given by the original court. Here it may be by way of either giving possession of the property or by either by declaring a particular right or by giving a perpetual injunction or by giving the possession of movable property or by ordering sale of the property, etc. It is to satisfy the claims of the plaintiff. And if the aggrieved party prefers to file an appeal, it can be filed before the higher court. Normally, there are two kinds of appeals from the decree. First, it should be first appeal, also called appeal against the suit, which may be either on questions of fact or questions of law or both. Complaint can be made against the judgment of original court before the higher court, including high court sometimes. Suppose even after filing this first appeal and after its decision, any party is still aggrieved, then there is a possibility of filing second appeal. We call it SA, and it is purely on questions of law. Questions of fact cannot be agitated while filing second appeal. And from there could be sometimes even special leave petitions, or the Supreme Court also may interfere when there is an appeal in civil disputes as laid down under the Constitution of India. This is one aspect. During the pendency of the suit, there can be something called reference, which can be made by lower court to the high court under the CPC, or there can be a civil revision petition simply called revision by the high court against some of the orders passed by the lower court, but from which no appeal lies, or there can be review by the same court once the decision is given. In fact, we call them 3 R's: reference, revision and review. This is one aspect. Conclusion. When we look at the 7 steps as pointed out just now, you will find that the civil litigation in India has come of age. There are many who prefer arbitration and other out of court proceedings, but many more prefer the adjudication of civil disputes through the judiciary, especially through the civil courts. And the Civil Procedure Code 1908 still continues to be the primary procedural law in civil matters. Very few amendments have been made to CPC 1908 in recent times, which shows that the Britishers have done well as far as laying down the civil procedure in India is concerned. Dear viewers, I hope that you have understood how the civil judicial system works in India, with special reference to the Civil Procedure Code 1908. I hope that you have enjoyed viewing this lesson. Let us meet in the next lesson. Thank you.